The planet was a shadow of its former self. Once a lush green paradise, it was now a wasteland of ash and smoke. Towering industrial chimneys belched thick clouds into the sky, choking out any sign of life. The ground was scarred with trenches and mining craters, a testament to years of relentless exploitation. For Erin, this hellish place had been her prison for far too long. Erin sat hunched on a cold metal bench in the prisoners' barracks, her thin fingers clutching a dented tin cup filled with stale water. Her once vibrant blue skin was now pale and dull, her eyes sunken from exhaustion. The electrified collar around her neck hummed faintly, a constant reminder of her captivity. She barely noticed it anymore, though. After years of servitude under the Syndra Consortium, the collar had become just another part of her existence, a symbol of the freedom she no longer dared to dream of. The guards were machines, both literally and figuratively. Syndra employed robotic enforcers to oversee their captives, towering constructs with glowing red eyes and voices devoid of emotion. They patrolled the facility endlessly, ensuring the prisoners remained obedient. Escape was unthinkable. Anyone who tried was met with swift and brutal consequences. The other prisoners were from countless different planets, each one broken in their own way. They shuffled silently between their assigned tasks, faces hollow and devoid of hope. Erin had once been like them, another cog in the Syndra machine. But lately, something had changed. She felt a spark deep inside her, a faint ember that refused to die, no matter how bleak her surroundings were. Her shift began with the usual monotony. The prisoners were herded into the mines, a vast underground network filled with clanking machinery and the constant grind of drills. Erin's task was to sort through the extracted minerals, her hands raw from the abrasive stones. The work was grueling, but her mind was elsewhere. She couldn't stop thinking about the faint rumors she'd overheard. A human engineer had arrived on the planet. Humans were rare in Syndra-controlled territories. Most avoided dealings with the corporation, knowing its reputation for corruption and cruelty. What was a human doing here? Curiosity bubbled up within Erin, though she tried to push it aside. It didn't matter. Whoever he was, he wouldn't change anything. Meanwhile, Leon stepped off the shuttle that had brought him to the planet, his boots crunching against the scorched earth. He adjusted the straps on his backpack, his sharp eyes scanning the industrial sprawl before him. The air was thick with the stench of burning metal, and the sound of machinery roared in his ears. This wasn't his first time on a Syndra-controlled planet, but it was the first time he felt a pang of unease. Leon was a man of many talents, an engineer by trade, a soldier by necessity. His past was a patchwork of battles fought and lost, comrades buried, and a gnawing sense of guilt that never quite left him. He had taken this job out of desperation, lured by the promise of good pay and the chance to fix something, even if it was just a failing power grid. As he made his way to the facility's main control center, Leon couldn't help but notice the prisoners. They moved like shadows, their heads bowed, their bodies bent under invisible weights. He had read about Syndra's practices, but seeing it firsthand was something else entirely. The spark of rebellion that had long been extinguished in these people still flickered faintly in his chest. A malfunction in one of the mining shafts brought Leon face to face with Erin for the first time. He had been called to repair a conveyor belt jam, and as he worked, he spotted her among the prisoners. She was different from the others. Her movements were deliberate, her gaze sharp despite the layers of exhaustion. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Leon saw something in her expression that surprised him. Defiance. Erin quickly looked away, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure why the human's presence unsettled her. Perhaps it was the way he carried himself, not like the guards or Syndra officials, but with a quiet strength. Or perhaps it was because, for the first time in years, someone had looked at her like she was a person, not a number. Leon returned to his quarters that evening, his mind racing. He had come here to fix machines, not get involved in Syndra's affairs. Yet the image of the blue-skinned woman lingered. He had seen desperation before, but he had also seen something else in her, a will to survive, a spark that could ignite a fire. As the artificial night settled over the mining colony, both Leon and Aaron found themselves staring at the same gray sky, lost in thought. Neither of them knew it yet, but their lives were about to intertwine in ways that would change everything. The sound of grinding machinery filled the air, a constant reminder of the endless toil forced upon the prisoners. Aaron was bent over a pile of jagged minerals, her hands aching from hours of sorting the sharp, unyielding rocks. The faint glow of her collar buzzed softly against her neck, a reminder that escape was impossible. She kept her head low, avoiding the glowing red eyes of the patrolling enforcer drones. Today felt different. There was an unusual tension in the air, a ripple that disturbed the routine monotony. Whispers among the prisoners hinted at the presence of the human, the engineer sent by Syndra to fix their faltering systems. Aaron didn't know what to think. A human could mean many things, none of them good. Yet there was a part of her, a small, rebellious part, that wondered if his arrival could somehow shift the balance of her bleak world. Leon had spent the morning inspecting the facility's control panels, his sharp eyes scanning for faults. The systems were in worse shape than he'd expected. Syndra had run the planet's machinery to the brink, with no care for its prisoners or even the workers. As he worked, he couldn't shake the image of the blue-skinned woman from his mind. There had been something in her eyes that struck him, a spark of life buried beneath layers of despair. Later that day, Leon was called to one of the mining shafts. A conveyor belt had jammed, halting the operation and drawing the ire of the robotic overseers. As he approached the site, he noticed the prisoners standing in a nervous cluster, their movements rigid and cautious. The enforcer drones hovered nearby, their sensors scanning for any signs of disobedience. Leon knelt beside the malfunctioning conveyor, his tools clicking softly as he worked. His presence drew curious glances from the prisoners, though none dared to linger too long. It wasn't until he glanced up that he saw her again. Aaron. She was standing slightly apart from the others, her posture tense but her gaze steady. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and the world around them seemed to pause. Aaron quickly looked away, her heart pounding. She hadn't meant to stare, but something about the human unsettled her. He wasn't like the others who worked for Syndra. His movements were purposeful but not harsh, and his expression lacked the cold detachment she had grown used to. She turned her attention back to the rocks in front of her, trying to push the encounter from her mind. Just as Leon finished his repairs, a loud crash echoed through the shaft. One of the mining carts had tipped over, spilling its heavy load, and sending prisoners scrambling to avoid the avalanche of rocks. Aaron reacted instinctively, darting forward to pull an older prisoner out of harm's way. The act drew the attention of an enforcer drone, which immediately whirred toward her, its glowing eyes fixed on her collar. Leon saw the situation unfold in an instant. The drone was preparing to deliver a shock to Aaron, its arm extending menacingly toward her. Without thinking, Leon stepped between her and the machine, raising his voice in mock frustration. "This system's a mess," he barked, gesturing to the conveyor belt. "The accident wasn't her fault. It's because of your faulty programming." The drone hesitated, its sensors flickering as it processed his words. After a tense moment, it retracted its arm and returned to its patrol, leaving Aaron unarmed. The prisoners watched in stunned silence, their expressions a mix of confusion and awe. No one had ever stood up to the enforcers before, not like that. Aaron looked at Leon, her expression guarded but her eyes filled with a quiet gratitude. She didn't say anything. She couldn't, not with the drones still nearby. But the look they exchanged spoke volumes. For the first time in years, someone had risked something for her, and it left her shaken. As the prisoners were herded back to their barracks, Aaron couldn't stop thinking about the human. He had no reason to intervene, no reason to care. Yet he had. She replayed the moment in her mind, trying to make sense of it. Perhaps he was different after all. Leon returned to his quarters that evening, his thoughts heavy. He had acted on instinct, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he had crossed a line. Sindra didn't tolerate insubordination, and his actions might have consequences. Still, he couldn't bring himself to regret it. There was something about Erin's defiance, her quiet strength, that had stirred something in him, a desire to help, to make a difference. As the artificial lights dimmed and the facility fell into its cold, mechanical night, two individuals lay awake in their separate quarters. One was a captive whose hope had been reignited by a single act of kindness. The other was a man who had begun to question everything he thought he knew about his role in the universe. Neither of them realized it yet, but their paths had become intertwined, and the spark of change had been lit. The days that followed their brief encounter were filled with an uneasy quiet. Erin resumed her routine in the mines, keeping her head down and her collar buzzing faintly around her neck. Yet something had changed. The human, Leon, lingered in her thoughts. She had spent so long believing no one cared about the suffering of her people, but his actions had proven otherwise. Though she didn't fully trust him, the memory of him stepping in to save her from the enforcer sparked something she hadn't felt in years: hope. Leon, on the other hand, found himself grappling with his conscience. Every corner of the mining facility reminded him of the suffering he was now complicit in. The hollow-eyed prisoners, the relentless enforcer drones, the oppressive atmosphere. It was all too much. He hadn't signed up for this. Sindra had promised him a simple job repairing machinery, but it was clear now that this planet was more than a mining site. It was a factory of despair. Late one evening, Leon sat in his dimly lit quarters, staring at the flickering screen of his datapad. Sindra's systems were riddled with flaws, and his access as an engineer gave him a unique opportunity to dig deeper. As he sifted through encrypted files, he uncovered something chilling. Sindra wasn't just extracting minerals from this planet. They were planning to move the prisoners to a harsher colony, a place known for breaking even the strongest wills. The transport ship was set to arrive in less than a week. Leon's hands tightened into fists. He couldn't let it happen. He couldn't stand by and watch as these people, Erin included, were sent to a fate even worse than this. But what could he do? He was just one man, and Sindra was a vast corporation with limitless resources. Any attempt to interfere would almost certainly result in his own death. Still, the image of Erin's defiant gaze haunted him. She had risked herself to save another prisoner, and in doing so, she had reminded Leon of something he had forgotten: a belief in doing what was right, no matter the cost. He made his decision then and there. If no one else would stand against Sindra, he would. The next morning, Leon began his preparations. He couldn't act openly, not with the enforcer drones constantly watching. Instead, he worked in secret, studying the facility's blueprints and identifying weak points in its security. The system was designed to suppress rebellion, but Leon was an expert at finding flaws. His plan was simple yet dangerous: disable the prisoners' collars, sabotage the enforcer drones, and create enough chaos to give the prisoners a chance to escape. The hardest part would be gaining the prisoners' trust. Leon knew that most of them, Erin included, had no reason to believe in him. He would have to convince them that he wasn't just another cog in Sindra's machine. He decided to start with Erin. Something about her told him she was a leader, even if she didn't realize it herself. Leon found her during the midday shift in the mines. She was sorting minerals as usual, her hands moving methodically, despite their rawness. He approached cautiously, aware of the enforcer drones patrolling nearby. "Erin," he said in a low voice, careful not to attract attention. She stiffened at the sound of her name, but didn't look up. "What do you want?" she asked, her tone guarded. "I need to talk to you," Leon replied. "Somewhere private." Erin finally glanced at him, her eyes narrowing with suspicion. "Why would I trust you?" "Because I'm not like them," Leon said firmly. "And because I can help you." Erin hesitated. She had no reason to believe him, yet something in his voice felt genuine. Against her better judgment, she nodded. 5 minutes. That's all." Later, in the shadow of a massive mining drill, Leon laid out his plan. He spoke quickly but clearly, explaining how he intended to disable the collars and disrupt the facility's systems. Erin listened in silence, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she crossed her arms. "You're insane," she said flatly. "Do you have any idea what Syndra will do if they catch you?" "I do," Leon said. "But I also know what will happen if we do nothing. That transport ship is coming, Erin. If we don't act now, none of you will ever see freedom." Erin's heart raced. She wanted to dismiss him, to tell him his plan was reckless and doomed to fail. But deep down, she knew he was right. Syndra would never stop. The only way to survive was to fight. Finally, she nodded. "I'll help you," she said. "But if this goes wrong, we're both dead." Leon smiled faintly. "Then let's make sure it doesn't." As the two parted ways, Erin felt the faint ember of hope flicker into something stronger. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that freedom might be possible. Meanwhile, Leon felt a renewed sense of purpose. Together, they had taken the first step toward a future worth fighting for. The cold, mechanical night settled over the mining facility, and the only sounds were the faint hum of the enforcer drones and the grinding of machinery that never slept. Erin sat on the edge of her cot, her mind racing with thoughts of Leon's plan. For years, she had resigned herself to this life, convinced that escape was a foolish dream. But now, for the first time, she felt a sliver of hope. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. Across the facility, Leon was hunched over his datapad in his dimly lit quarters. His fingers flew across the screen as he hacked into Syndra's systems, searching for ways to disable the collars and disrupt the enforcer drones. The plan was risky, but he had no choice. Time was running out, and the transport ship would arrive in 3 days. The next morning, Leon and Erin met again, this time in the shadow of a towering conveyor belt that drowned out the noise of their conversation. Erin had brought along 2 other prisoners, Krell, a hulking alien with sharp tusks, and Myra, a wiry woman with quick hands and sharp eyes. They were both trusted among the prisoners and had agreed to help after Erin vouched for Leon. Leon laid out the details of the plan, using a crude map he had drawn on a scrap of fabric. "First, we need to disable the collars," he began. "They're controlled by a central server located in the main control tower. I can access it remotely, but I'll need time to override the system." "What about the enforcer drones?" Krell rumbled, his deep voice vibrating the air. "They'll tear us apart before we take 2 steps." "That's where Myra comes in," Leon said, nodding to her. "I'll show you how to plant EMP charges on their patrol routes. It won't destroy them, but it'll disable them long enough for us to move." "And after that?" Erin asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside her. "We'll head to the hangar and commandeer the transport ship," Leon replied. "It's automated, so once we're on board, I can program it to take us to safety." Silence fell as the group processed the plan. It was dangerous, and the chances of success were slim. But as Erin looked around at the determined faces of her companions, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in years: belief. They spent the rest of the day putting the plan into motion. Myra worked tirelessly, sneaking through the facility's labyrinth of tunnels to plant the EMP charges where they would be most effective. Krell used his strength to gather supplies and subtly sabotage equipment, creating small distractions that kept the enforcers occupied. Erin, meanwhile, took on the role of rallying the other prisoners. She moved quietly among them, whispering words of encouragement and hope. At first, many were skeptical. They had been broken by years of captivity and saw no point in risking their lives. But Erin's determination was infectious, and one by one, they began to join the cause. Leon worked late into the night, his fingers numb from hours of coding and bypassing Syndra's firewalls. Each time he hit a roadblock, he thought of Erin's eyes, sharp and unyielding, filled with the strength of someone who refused to give up. It pushed him forward, driving him to succeed where failure was not an option. By the second day, the group faced their first major setback. An enforcer drone discovered one of Myra's EMP charges before it could be activated. The drone raised the alarm, sending the facility into lockdown. Panic spread among the prisoners as the guards increased their patrols, and the chances of success seemed to dwindle. Erin refused to let the fear take hold. She gathered the prisoners in the dimly lit barracks and spoke to them with a quiet, steady voice. "We've been afraid for too long," she said. "We've let them control us, break us, but not anymore. This is our chance to fight back, to take back our lives. We can do this, but only if we stand together." Her words ignited something in the prisoners. They began to organize, moving with purpose and watching each other's backs. Even in the face of increased surveillance, they refused to back down. Leon, meanwhile, adjusted the plan. He worked with Myra to create decoy charges, drawing the enforcers away from their true targets. It was a gamble, but it bought them the time they needed to finish planting the EMPs and secure the tools to disable the collars. As the second night fell, Erin and Leon found themselves standing together in the shadows, watching the facility's lights flicker ominously. "Are you scared?" Leon asked, his voice low. "Terrified," Erin admitted, "but for the first time, it feels like I'm fighting for something real." Leon nodded. "We're going to make it," he said, his voice firm. "We have to." The final pieces of the plan were in place. All that remained was to execute it. As they parted ways to prepare for the next day, both Erin and Leon knew that the coming hours would determine everything. Freedom was within their grasp, but it would come at a cost. They could only hope they were ready to pay it. The artificial dawn broke over the facility, but instead of bringing hope, it brought tension. The prisoners moved like shadows, their faces unreadable but their movements purposeful. Erin felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her chest. Today was the day. Everything they had prepared for over the past 2 days would be tested. If they failed, it wouldn't just mean punishment. It would mean the end of any chance for freedom. Leon double-checked his datapad as he moved through the maintenance corridors. He had spent the entire night ensuring the code to disable the collars would work. He couldn't afford any mistakes. The EMP charges Myra had planted were all in place, and Krell had managed to secure tools and supplies to help the prisoners fight if necessary. Now, it was up to him to make the first move. Erin watched from the shadows as the enforcer drones continued their patrols, unaware of the storm about to break. The other prisoners huddled in small groups, waiting for her signal. Despite her nerves, Erin kept her expression calm. They were looking to her for strength, and she couldn't let them see her fear. At exactly the agreed-upon time, a low hum reverberated through the facility. The lights flickered, then dimmed as Leon triggered a controlled power outage in the main grid. For a few precious minutes, the enforcers' systems were confused, their patrols disrupted. It was the opening they needed. "Go," Erin whispered to the prisoners around her. They scattered, moving quickly and silently through the shadows toward their designated positions. Leon worked fast, his fingers flying over the datapad. He bypassed Syndra's security protocols and activated the override sequence. A series of soft clicks echoed through the facility as the collars around the prisoners' necks deactivated one by one. Erin felt hers fall away, and for the first time in years, she could breathe freely. She touched her neck, almost in disbelief. "It worked," she murmured, her voice trembling. The prisoners' reactions varied. Some let out quiet gasps of relief, while others simply stared at the broken collars in their hands, as if afraid this was just a cruel trick. Erin quickly stepped forward, her voice firm, but filled with urgency. "We're free now, but we're not safe yet," she said. "Stick to the plan, and we'll make it out of here together." Her words snapped them into action. Groups of prisoners began moving toward the facility's central areas, where Leon had disabled the enforcer drones using the EMP charges. The drones sparked and twitched, their red eyes flickering as they collapsed to the ground. It wasn't permanent, but it bought them enough time to make their escape. As the prisoners moved, the facility's alarm system finally caught up to the chaos. A blaring siren echoed through the corridors, and emergency lights bathed the walls in an ominous red glow. Syndra's human guards, who had been slow to respond, now flooded the area, armed and ready to subdue the rebellion. Leon met up with Erin and her group near the main hangar. He was out of breath but determined. "The ship is prepped and ready," he said. "We just need to get everyone on board." Erin nodded, her eyes scanning the corridor behind them. "We have to hurry. They'll be here any second." No sooner had she spoken than a group of guards rounded the corner, their weapons raised. The prisoners scattered, diving for cover as energy blasts filled the air. Erin ducked behind a crate, her heart pounding. She looked over at Leon, who was already pulling out a makeshift weapon, a modified welding torch he had rigged to fire short bursts of plasma. Krell roared as he charged the guards, using his massive strength to overpower them. Myra moved like a shadow, slipping behind the guards and disarming them before they even realized she was there. Erin focused on rallying the other prisoners, directing them toward the hangar while Leon and the others held off the guards. The battle was chaotic and brutal, but the prisoners fought with the desperation of those who had nothing left to lose. For every guard that fell, another seemed to take their place, and Erin feared they wouldn't be able to hold them off for long. "Go!" Leon shouted to Erin, his voice cutting through the noise. "Get them on the ship. I'll hold them here." Erin hesitated for a moment, torn between helping him and following the plan. But she knew he was right. The prisoners needed her to lead them. She nodded, her expression fierce. "Don't die on me, Leon." With that, she turned and led the remaining prisoners toward the hangar. The massive transport ship loomed ahead, its engines already humming thanks to Leon's earlier work. Erin ushered the prisoners on board, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. Just as the last of the prisoners climbed aboard, Leon appeared, his face streaked with dirt and sweat. He staggered slightly but waved her off when she tried to help him. "I'm fine. Let's get out of here." Erin climbed into the pilot's seat, her fingers trembling as she activated the controls. The ship's engines roared to life, and she guided it out of the hangar, leaving the facility behind. As the planet shrank in the distance, Erin allowed herself a small smile. They had done it. They were free. But she knew this was just the beginning. The Syndra Consortium wouldn't let them go so easily. Their fight was far from over. The transport ship roared through the barren skies, leaving the desolate mining planet behind. Inside, the atmosphere was a mix of relief and tension. The once enslaved prisoners huddled together, their faces a mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. For many, it was the first time they had seen open skies in years. Freedom was finally within reach, but none of them dared to celebrate yet. They all knew Syndra would come for them. Erin sat at the helm, her hands gripping the controls tightly. Her heart was still racing from the escape, but her focus remained sharp. She glanced at Leon, who was seated beside her, his face pale and streaked with dirt. His injured arm was hastily bandaged, but he waved off any offers of help, determined to monitor the ship's systems. "How long until they find us?" Erin asked, her voice low but steady. Leon tapped on the console, bringing up a display of the ship's trajectory. "We've got a head start, but it won't last long. Syndra's ships are faster and better equipped. They'll be on us in a matter of hours." Erin nodded, her expression grim. She turned to Krell, who stood by the door, his massive frame barely fitting in the cramped cockpit. "We need to prepare, gather everyone, and see what supplies we have. We'll fight if we have to." Krell nodded and lumbered off, his deep voice rumbling as he called the prisoners to action. Erin leaned back in her seat, letting out a slow breath. She didn't want to admit it, but fear was gnawing at the edges of her resolve. They were outmatched in every way, and the odds of surviving a Syndra attack were slim. Leon noticed her tension and spoke up. "We've made it this far," he said, his voice calm despite the situation. We'll figure something out. Erin looked at him, her eyes searching his face. Despite his injuries and the overwhelming odds, Leon's determination hadn't wavered. It was something she admired about him, something that gave her strength. "We have to," she replied. "There's no going back now." Hours later, the alarm blared throughout the ship, jolting everyone into action. Syndra's pursuit vessels had appeared on their radar, closing in fast. The prisoners scrambled to their positions, arming themselves with makeshift weapons and whatever tools they could find. The tension was palpable, but Erin and Leon worked quickly, coordinating their defenses. "They're hailing us," Leon said, glancing at the communication console. "Syndra wants us to surrender." Erin's jaw tightened. She activated the intercom, her voice ringing out across the ship. "Listen to me. They'll tell us to surrender, to give up and go back. But we've come too far to stop now. This is our fight, and we won't let them take us again. Stay strong, and remember, we're not just running. We're fighting for our freedom." Cheers erupted from the prisoners, their courage reignited by Erin's words. Leon gave her a nod of approval before turning his attention back to the controls. "They're almost on us. Get ready." The first blast shook the ship, sending sparks flying from the walls. Syndra's ships were firing warning shots, their intent clear. They wanted to intimidate, to make surrender seem like the only option. But Erin wasn't about to let that happen. "Hold steady," she called out, her hands gripping the controls as she maneuvered the ship through the barrage of fire. Leon worked beside her, activating the ship's limited defensive systems. The stolen vessel wasn't designed for combat, but it had enough power to fight back, at least for a little while. Krell and Myra led the other prisoners in defending the ship. They used improvised weapons and repurposed equipment to repel Syndra's boarding drones, which had latched onto the hull. The battle was chaotic and desperate, but the prisoners fought with everything they had, refusing to let Syndra take them without a fight. In the cockpit, Leon's hands flew across the console as he worked to outmaneuver the enemy ships. "If we can make it to the asteroid belt ahead, we might lose them," he said, his voice tight with concentration. Erin nodded, her focus unyielding. She pushed the ship's engines to their limit, weaving through the barrage of laser fire. Syndra's ships were relentless, but Erin's sharp instincts and Leon's technical skills kept them one step ahead. As they approached the asteroid belt, Leon activated a set of decoy signals, scattering Syndra sensors. The maneuver bought them precious seconds, enough to slip into the dense field of rocks and debris. Erin piloted the ship with precision, using the asteroids as cover to evade their pursuers. Behind them, Syndra's ships hesitated, their advanced systems struggling to navigate the chaotic terrain. It wasn't a victory, but it was enough to create distance. For now, they were safe. In the silence that followed, Erin slumped back in her seat, her hands trembling from the adrenaline. Leon leaned back as well, his face a mixture of exhaustion and relief. "We did it," he said, a faint smile crossing his lips. Erin glanced at him, her expression softening. "For now," she replied. "But we're not out of this yet." As the ship drifted into the safety of the asteroid belt, the prisoners began to regroup, their hope growing stronger with each passing moment. They had faced Syndra and survived. It wasn't just luck. It was their will to fight, their refusal to be broken. Erin looked out at the stars, her heart swelling with determination. They had escaped, but the fight was far from over. Syndra would come for them again, but this time they would be ready. This time they would stand together. The asteroid belt stretched endlessly before them, a vast, chaotic expanse of drifting rocks and debris illuminated by the faint glow of distant stars. Erin sat at the helm, her gaze fixed on the void outside. Her hands were steady now, the tremors from the battle having faded, but her mind raced with thoughts of what lay ahead. For the first time in years, they were free, but freedom felt fragile, like a thin layer of ice over a deep ocean of danger. Behind her, The ship buzzed with quiet activity. The prisoners, no survivors, moved about, tending to their wounds, sharing food, and repairing the damage sustained during the battle. They were a patchwork of species, backgrounds, and skills, but they were united by a shared goal: survival. Leon entered the cockpit, his arm in a proper sling now, though he still moved with the energy of someone who refused to rest. He dropped into the seat beside Aaron, letting out a heavy sigh. "Engines are stable," he reported. "The damage was worse than I thought, but Krell and Mara managed to patch things up. We got enough power to keep moving, at least for a while." Aaron glanced at him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "You should rest. You've done enough." Leon chuckled, shaking his head. "I'll rest when we're out of Syndra's reach." Her smile faded as her thoughts returned to the corporation that had enslaved her people. Syndra wouldn't stop. They would hunt them down, send more ships, and try to reclaim what they believed was theirs. But Aaron wasn't afraid anymore. She had seen what they were capable of: the strength, the ingenuity, the resilience. Together, they were more than just survivors. They were fighters. "Leon," she said quietly, "what happens next?" He leaned back in his seat, his gaze distant. "We find a safe place to land, somewhere Syndra won't find us. We regroup, rebuild, and figure out how to keep them off our backs." Erin nodded, her mind already racing with possibilities. "And after that?" Leon hesitated, his expression thoughtful. "After that, we fight, not just for ourselves, but for everyone Syndra has taken, for everyone who's still trapped, still waiting for a chance to be free." His words struck a chord deep within her. For so long, Erin had thought only of escape, of surviving another day. But now she saw the bigger picture. Freedom wasn't just about running away. It was about standing up, fighting back, and making sure no one else had to suffer the way they had. A soft knock at the cockpit door interrupted her thoughts. Myra stepped in, her sharp eyes scanning the room before settling on Aaron and Leon. "We've taken stock of our supplies," she said. "We've got enough food and water for a few weeks, but the fuel cells won't last much longer. If we're going to keep moving, we'll need to find a source of power." Leon frowned, rubbing his chin. "There's a trading outpost on the edge of the belt. It's risky, but they might have what we need." Aaron's brow furrowed. "Won't Syndra be watching places like that?" "Probably," Leon admitted, "but it's a chance we'll have to take. Without fuel, we're sitting ducks." Myra nodded. "I'll spread the word. Everyone's ready to do whatever it takes." As she left, Aaron turned back to Leon. "What do you think our chances are?" He met her gaze, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "Honestly, slim, but slim is better than none." Aaron couldn't help but smile back. Despite everything, Leon's determination never wavered. It was a strength she had come to rely on, and it gave her hope. Hours later, the trading outpost came into view. It was a haphazard collection of buildings and ships, orbiting a small asteroid like a mechanical hive. The outpost was neutral territory, a place where smugglers, traders, and fugitives mingled. It wasn't safe, but it was their best shot. Aaron guided the ship into the docking bay, her hand steady on the controls. As the engines powered down, she turned to the group gathered behind her. "This is it," she said. "We go in, get what we need, and get out. Stay together and don't draw attention." Leon stood beside her, his injured arm tucked close to his body. "Remember, we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for a future." The prisoners nodded, their expressions grim but resolute. Together, they stepped off the ship, their first steps into a new chapter of their lives. The air was tense, the outpost bustling with activity, but they moved with purpose. For the first time in years, Aaron felt something she thought she had lost forever: hope. They had escaped Syndra, survived the battle, and now stood on the brink of something greater. Their journey was far from over, but she knew they would face whatever came next together. As the group disappeared into the crowd, Aaron looked up at the stars beyond the outpost. They were free, and freedom was worth fighting for.